This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
And this is NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio. It's our second time this week with erstwhile Poets Laureate.
Poets Laureate.
Once again,
Poets Laureate.
Yes, Rich Michelson, and a very special other Poet Laureate, erstwhile Poet Laureate.
My predecessor. Yesterday we had my successor. Now we have my predecessor.
Rich is getting squeezed in the poetry world. Oh, well.
Well, it's National Poetry Month, so we've got a daily show here. Why not?
Totally cool.
My guest today is actually, I think, have been on this show more than any other guest. I think this is our fourth or fifth time. Martin Espada. One of the great poets in this country, certainly in this area. Martin is reading this Sunday, April 7th, at the Jones Library in Amherst, Massachusetts, from 3 to 4:30. That's Sunday, April 7th. And there are very few awards you haven't won. So welcome back, Martin.
And we also could give him a special award for most appearances on
NPR
NPR
Public Radio, and of course you've been on the other NPR too. Right?
What do I get?
What do I get?
You're a poet. You get accolades. You get love. You think you get paid for this stuff?
So,
I want a T-shirt.
Well, since you've been here, because the last time you have won the 2018 Ruth Lilly Prize from the Poetry Foundation. For those non-poets in the audience, that's about as great a poetry prizes you can get in this country. The Poetry Foundation chooses a poet who has made an incredible contribution to this country's poetry scene, and they do a special portfolio in their magazine. Yours was in November 18, and you're going to be reading poems from that portfolio this Sunday?
Yes.
At Jones Library.
That's correct. New work.
So your last book, Vivas to Those Who Have Failed, an incredible book, and The Republic of Poetry, an earlier book, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Martin has been called the Neruda of the United States, the son of Whitman. You've recently been on a documentary, Citizen Walt Whitman.
Yes, it was a documentary called Citizen Poet.
And how did that come about? You were...
Well, it's produced by the Poetry Foundation. And it was a film made by Hayden Reese, a short film featuring me and Bob Haas and Tracy K. Smith, the current Poet Laureate of the United States. And I believe I was chosen ultimately because of my beard.
It is Whitman-esque.
It's the Whitman Prize.
The Whitman look. Okay.
Yes.
So
I didn't quite get there. I'm trying to grow the full Whitman beard. It more turned out like John Brown.
Yeah. I was sporting a Hemingway beard a little bit earlier this year. I thought, I'm kind of channeling Hemingway now.
The clean-shaven folks are across from each other here.
Okay, Rich,
we've got
together.
The two Jews, the two clean-shaven Jews. This is America in the 2019. So, Martin, let's dig right in, because there's nothing I enjoy more than hearing you read. A poem from the portfolio that you'll be reading from.
Yes, so this is a poem from the Lilly Prize portfolio, published in Poetry Magazine, November 2018, which I will be reading this Sunday at the Jones Library at 3 o'clock. This is a poem that takes me back. It takes me back more than 25 years to another life when, in fact, I was...
A lawyer?
A lawyer.
Oh, my goodness. Another recovering lawyer, for those of you who did not know that about Martin Espada.
Right.
And actually very successful tenants' rights attorney.
Yes.
And I do, let me just, before you continue here, say that this Sunday when you're reading at Jones Library, you're reading with another poet, George Abraham, a Palestinian poet who is a bioengineer PhD at Harvard. So poets have other lives too.
Yes, and so I don't have a PhD from anywhere, but I do have a Juris Doctor from Northeastern University in Boston.
That counts.
I practiced law in Greater Boston for a number of years. And I came to focus on housing law, tenant law. I was a supervisor of a program called Su Clínica Legal, Su Clínica Legal Legal Services Program for low-income Spanish-speaking tenants in Chelsea. And most of your listeners will know Chelsea. It's a tough little town right across the Tobin Bridge from Boston, a gateway city, a city of immigrants. It always has been. And in those days, the immigrants were coming from the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, Puerto Rico and the DR. And I was there to represent them and to supervise law students from Suffolk University Law School doing the same. You can imagine the reception we received, to put it mildly. It reminds me very much of the reception that immigrants are receiving today. And there are times when, as activists, we question, my God, have we accomplished anything? Because it seems as if all the gains we won have been rolled back. And all of the struggles and all of the bitter bigotry now emerging around immigrants and immigration, I saw firsthand right there in Chelsea back in those days in the late 80s, early 90s. I wrote a poem recently reflecting on those days and thinking of the present. It's called Jumping Off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. So the first half of the poem is based on an actual incident where I was stuck in traffic with a cabbie on the Mystic Tobin Bridge and the dialogue that resulted. The second half of the poem is about perhaps the most notorious murder case in Boston history, the case of Chuck Stewart, the man who shot his pregnant wife and then blamed it on a black carjacker. And all of it comes full circle back to the present. So we'll start here. This is called Jumping Off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. I close my eyes and see him windmilling his arms as he plummets from the Mystic Tobin Bridge, to prove me wrong, to show me he was good, to atone for sins like seeds in the lopsided apple of his heart, but mostly to escape from me in the back of his cab, a Puerto Rican lawyer in a suit and tie. I hated the 111 bus, sweltering in my suit and tie with the crowd in the aisle, waiting to hit a bump on the Mystic Tobin Bridge so my head would finally burst through the ceiling like a giraffe on a circus train. I hated the 111 bus after eviction day in Chelsea District Court, translating the landlords and judges into Spanish so the tenants knew they had to stuff their clothing into garbage bags and steal away again, away from the 40-watt squint that followed them everywhere, that followed me because I stood beside them in court. I would daydream in the humidity of the bus, a basketball hero, flipping the balled-up pages of the law into the wastebasket at the office as the legal aid lawyers chanted my name. I hated the 111 bus. I had to take a taxi cab that day. "What the hell are you doing here?" said the driver of the cab to me in my suit and tie. "You gotta be careful in this neighborhood. There's a lot of Jose's around here." The driver's great-grandfather staggered off a boat so his great-grandson could one day drive me across the Mystic Tobin Bridge, but there was no room in the taxi for chalk and a blackboard. He could hear the sawing of my breath as I leaned into his ear past the bulletproof barricade, somehow missing, and said, "I'm a Jose." I could see the 40-watt squint in his rearview mirror. "I'm Puerto Rican," I said. It was exactly 5 p.m., and we were stuck in traffic in a taxi on the Mystic Tobin Bridge. The driver stammered his own West Side story without the ballet, how a Puerto Rican gang stole his cousin's wallet years ago. "You think I'm going to rob you?" I said, in my suit and tie, close enough now to tickle his ear with the mouth of a revolver. I could hear the sawing of his breath. He still wanted to know what I was doing there. "I'm a lawyer. I go to court with all the Jose's," I said. Stalled traffic steamed around us, the breath of cattle in the winter air. Where you going for the holidays?" the driver said. I thought about Christmas Eve in court, eviction orders flying from the judge's bench when tenants without legal aid lawyers or children old enough to translate the English of the summons did not answer to their names. Every year, the legal aid lawyers told a joke about the Christmas defense. Your Honor, it's Christmas. I said to the driver, I will be spending Christmas right here with my fellow Jose's. The driver shouted, What do you want me to do? Get out of this cab and jump off the bridge? We both knew what he meant. We both knew about Chuck Stewart, the last man to jump off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. Everybody knew how Chuck drove his wife to Mission Hill after birthing classes, the flash and pop in the dark when he shot her in the head and himself in the belly. Everybody knew how he conjured a black carjacker on the crackling call to 911, the way the Mercury Theater of the Air conjured Martians in New Jersey on the radio half a century before. Everybody knew how 100 cops pounded on door after door in the projects of Mission Hill, locking a black man in a cage for the world to see like the last of his tribe on exhibit at the World's Fair. Everybody knew how Chuck would have escaped cashing the insurance check to drive away with a new Nissan, but for his brother's confession, the accomplice throwing the Gucci bag with makeup, the wedding rings, and the gun off the Dizzy Bridge in Revere. Everybody knew how Chuck parked his new car on the lower deck, left a note, and launched himself deep into the black water, how the cops hauled his body from the river by lunchtime when I walked into the office to tell the secretary. Chuck Stewart just jumped off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. I said nothing to the driver. I almost nodded yes in the rearview mirror. I confess, for a flash, I wanted him to jump. The driver, the cops, the landlords, the judges, all wanted us to jump off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. All wanted us to sprout gills like movie monsters so we could paddle underwater back to the islands, down into the weeds and mud at the bottom, past the fish-plucked rib cages of the dead, the rusty revolvers of 1,000 crimes unsolved, the wedding rings of marriages gone bad, till we washed up on shore in a tangle of seaweed, gasping for air. Last night, still more landed here. Clothing stuffed in garbage bags, to flee the god of hurricanes flinging their houses into the sky, or the god of hunger slipping his knife between the ribs. Not a dark tide like the tide of the Mystic River, but builders of bridges. You can walk across the bridges they build, or you can jump.
Martin Espada, a chronicler of our times. You're listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, on the Bill Newman Show. Martine will be reading this Sunday, April 7th, at the Jones Library in Amherst from 3 o'clock. Please join us. We'll be right back.
With more from Rich Michelson and Martin Espada after this.
This is Bill Newman, WHMP. This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
We continue NPR Northampton Poetry Radio with erstwhile Poets Laureate Rich Michelson and Martin Espada.
Martin, that poem that I think people are still absorbing at home and living with is one of the most powerful poems I've heard. I think I could probably recite that poem by heart. It's a very important poem to me. In fact, the way poets work, it's a poem that I think led to a poem that I wrote, a sestina called Gossip is Forbidden. I remember it, say that. And that poem, I'm very pleased to say my poem, a response to your poem, will be in an upcoming anthology called What Saves Us? Poems of Empathy and Outrage in the Age of Trump. And the editor of that anthology is a poet by the name of Martin Espada. And so I'm curious, because you're obviously reading a lot of poems and getting a lot of poems for this anthology, which will be out in the fall and is going to be a very important document. Has Trump, in a sense, the poets are responding. Are we doing any good?
I think we are. There are many ways I can answer that question. For example, we are often told you should never preach to the choir. and political poets especially, we get scolded. Do not preach to the choir. Well, right now, I think the choir needs preaching too. The choir needs all the help it can get. The choir needs moral support. The choir needs inspiration. The choir needs to get on its feet and sing. And so for starters, even if that's all we were doing, it would be enough. But I also think that poetry has a way of reaching people and going into the corners of our society in surprising ways. In a couple of days, I'm going up to Maine. I'm going to be doing a reading at the University of Maine in Augusta, but I'm also going to do a reading at Maine State Prison in their chapel there, and they're going to bring in several different groups of inmates, and some of them are writing and reading. And more than one person in prison has turned around a life because of something, a poem, a story, and it comes down to that. If we communicate with each other eloquently as possible, then things happen. And I cannot weigh or measure, quantify, label, or package the impact of a poem that I write. I put it up into the air that we breathe and into the air for broadcast, and off it goes. But as a professor of mine at Wisconsin used to say, Herbert Hill, ideas have consequences. I believe in that principle.
We need that. Thank you for whatever hope we have. You're here. Let's do another poem if we can, and let people give a sense of what they're going to hear when they show up this Sunday, April 7th, at the Jones Library at 3 p.m. in Amherst. Another poem by Martin Espada.
Yes, this is a new poem. It's an obad, which is a poetic form about lovers parting at dawn. So now I'm writing love poems. But of course, they're political love poems. I can't help myself. And this is a poem for Lauren Marie Schmidt, who is a teacher at a high school in Springfield, as well as a very accomplished poet, I might add, and my partner. So we were living in Leverett. This was about a year ago, a little more than a year ago when this happened. And she had to commute to Springfield in the dark to get to work. This is what happened next. It's called Obad with Concussion. Epigraph. Poverty is black ice. Naomi Ajala. You leave me sleeping in the dark. You kiss me and I stir, fingers in your hair, eyes open, unseeing. You leave me asleep every morning, commuting to the school in the city at sunrise. The landlord's driveway, a muddy creek, ices over hard after the freezing rain clatters all night. Your feet fly up, your head slamming the ground, an eclipse of the sun flooding your eyes. You sleep under the car. No one knows how long you sleep. You awake with 100 ice picks stabbing your eardrums. You awake, coat and hair soaked, and somehow drive to school. You remember to turn left at the Smith & Wesson factory. The other teachers lead you by the elbow to Mercy Hospital, where you pause when the nurse asks your name, where you claim your pain level is a 4, and they slide you into the white coffin of an MRI machine. You hold your breath. They film your brain. Concussion. The word we use for the boxer plunging face first to the canvas after the uppercut blindsided him, not the teacher commuting to school at sunrise in a Subaru Crosstrek. Yet, you would drive, ears hammering as they hammer in the purgatory of the MRI. A week before, Isabella came to you in the classroom and said, "Miss, I cannot sleep. 3 days. I cannot sleep." Her boyfriend called at 2 a.m. and she did not pick up. At 3 a.m., a single shot to the head put him to sleep, and he will sleep forever, his body hidden beneath a car in a parking lot on Maple Street, the cops, the television cameras, the neighbors all gathering at the yellow tape carnival of his corpse. You said to Isabella, "Take this journal, write it down. You don't have to show me. You don't have to show anyone." On the cover of the journal you bought at the drugstore was the word dream. Isabella sat there in your classroom at your desk, pencil waving in furious circles. By lunchtime, as her friends slapped each other, Isabella slept, head on the desk, face pressed against the pages of the journal. This is why I watch you sleep at 3 a.m. when the sleeping pills fail to quell the strike meeting in my brain. This is why I say to you, when you kiss me in my sleep, "Don't go. Don't go. You have to go."
Martin Espada, this Sunday, Jones Library in Amherst, April 7th. You're listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, on The Bill Newman Show. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Bill and Monty.
Thank you, Rich Michelson.
This is Bill Newman, WHMP.